Here we are again. Hello, dear community. It's been a while since we did our last meetup, but nonetheless, we are here right in the middle of a summertime. It's really hot here in Germany, and now it's a bit more, yeah, so to say, not so hot anymore at the evening hours. And but the topic might be hot again, as I'm really excited to have Matthias here with us this evening from derspiegel. He's the deputy head of the graphics desk, and I discovered recently what he is doing, awesome stuff, and also Svelte and D3. So I'm really, yeah, excited that you are here today, and yeah, maybe you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jan. Thanks for having me here at the meeting. It's really a pleasure. I'm Matthias, and I'm working in Hamburg at the German news magazine Der Spiegel. I guess some of you might know it. And we have a print issue, we have a website, and I am co-leading the graphics desk there. And we are basically responsible for all the graphics and data visualization that come into the print issue and our website, spiegel.de.
Cool. I'm also a front-end developer, so that's because I'm curious also. What was your way to Svelte? Just as an introduction question, was it the same way, like you saw maybe Rich Harris doing his things, and you became curious? Maybe you already did something with Svelte before, or is it totally new to you, or unless you started with that at Spiegel? What was the way to Svelte?
Yeah, good question. So it's quite curious. It was in 2019 when I first got to know Svelte. And when I lived in Stockholm in Sweden, and there I was working for a university for the medical department there, and we were doing some front-end development for the hospital. So they needed a portal where they can see data about the patients and data about all the diseases they have and so on. And we built that portal with Vue.js. And it was okay, but it had some pain points. And at the same time, I was regularly watching a YouTube show, which is called Coding Garden with CJ. I think it still exists, but it just, I don't know, 2,000 followers, but now it has 100,000 or so. And I watched him regularly, like, because he had some tricks how to use for data visualization. He said, well, there's a really cool new tool. It's called Svelte. And I showed it to you. And then he presented Svelte. And I thought, well, that's exactly the thing we need for our database portal. And the next day, we completely deleted all the Vue code and restarted the project with Svelte, and it was a big success. And since then, I really love Svelte, especially for data visualization.
Cool. Awesome. Interesting. I saw a comment. This connection seems to be lacking from time to time. Yeah, not sure if you can do anything on this. Hope it gets better. Yeah, before we start, just maybe a short information. I'm not sure who of you knows our community, so just one sentence. We are Frontend RheinMain, and yeah, due to Corona, we are not like bound to Rhine-Main region only. So that's why we now can reach out to Hamburg this evening, and we also had other speakers from the world. And we plan to do some real meetups in person in Rhine-Main soonish, hopefully maybe in August or after the end of the summertime. You can check out our website. We have a very small website. It's just an entry page with links to Meetup and YouTube. So you can follow us also on Twitter. That's the way how you can follow us. Yeah, and stay tuned for upcoming events. We were a bit passive the last months, and we will start with some more events this year. And this is the first one. So, and if you have questions to Matthias, please don't hesitate to post them in the chat. I will take a look at this, and after the session, there is a lot of time for answering the questions and having a small exchange with Matthias.
Absolutely.
Okay. Then let's hope the connection gets better or is fine so far. If not, please say it in the comments. And yeah, with that, I wish you a lot of fun, and the stage is yours, Matthias.
Thank you, Jan. Yeah, I just want to begin with a continuation of my introduction that I did a few minutes back. And as I've already said, I'm working for the news magazine Der Spiegel, and there I'm co-leading the graphics desk. And just that you have an idea, this is around 20 colleagues, and we have like graphics designers, we have web designers, we also have developers, which is 100% JavaScript development. We also have editors and like journalists that write their own stories. So we do from a simple graphic to a complete story to a certain topic, a visual story. We do everything. And we do a lot with Svelte. And I always wonder if this is due to quite similar logos that we share. But coming to data visualization that we do in the newsroom or for the newsroom, I just want to show you a little bit how many facets data visualization can have. So, I mean, dataviz is, I guess, familiar to everyone, but I think it is a little bit special when it comes to the newspapers or in general newsrooms. Basically, we have a very large variety of different visualizations that we can do. There's the very simple charts and graphics, like this simple bar chart that we can produce once, and then we can reuse it for print and for online, also in a responsive way. Then there are these more custom little visualizations that are often hand-drawn. They will use like tools like Illustrator, in combination with a script that's coming from the New York Times, which is called AI to HTML, where you can then transform an Illustrator file into an HTML file, and then it's also responsive on the web. But then there's also a lot the more complex projects like that one where we visualized speed skaters during the Olympics in China earlier this year. And these very custom projects, often interactive or animated projects, they are all built with Svelte, often in combination with D3. And yeah, this is like the bandwidth of different projects that we can have. And of course, there are different time spans behind. And if you're interested in that, maybe we can talk about that in the discussion as well, how long we take for each of these projects. But for all these different types of visualizations, there are 3 requirements that we usually have for these graphics and visualizations. So first of all, there is speed. So we usually need to produce these visualizations and these graphics in a very short amount of time. So yeah, we are in the newsrooms, and so we are coupled to the news cycle, and we need to be really fast when there's like an earthquake somewhere on the earth. Then we need, of course, a map immediately. And so we need, of course, the tools to be that quick. Then second point, and yeah, it has the same importance, of course, as speed is accuracy. So that means everything that we publish is seen by thousands of people immediately on the website, for example. And so it needs to be really, really accurate, and we need to make sure that the quality is always high. And of course, speed and accuracy can be competing interests, as you wish. And then as a third requirement, we have originality. So that means that people need to see that a certain graphic is from Der Spiegel. And so we need like a corporate identity at some point. That we need to incorporate in all of our graphics. And when it comes to the more complex visualizations, like the speed skating visualization that I showed you in the beginning, then we rely on D3 and Svelte. And for us, D3 is like the graphics power horse. And I guess you all have heard of D3 in one or the other way. So with D3, you can produce whole websites, basically, like that one, which is a stacked area bump chart, which you can do with the functions that are provided by D3 to you. And of course, the cool thing, for some also the pain point of D3, but for us, more the cool thing is that D3 is very low level. And so you can really sketch a visualization on paper. And usually it's no problem to just implement that sketched visualization as it is in the browser with D3, because yeah, more or less everything is possible what a browser can display. But D3 alone can also be a bit hard to use. So maybe, yeah, the ones of you who use it regularly know, okay, it has this imperative coding style. So you have to really tell the browser, do this, do this, do this, but you do not see the end result in the browser yet. So you do not write HTML, for example, which would be cool for such a visualization. It's easier to read in the code and easier to reuse, easier to share with other developers. No, with D3, you have to write everything in JavaScript in this imperative coding style. And that's why D3 for us is not a full framework anymore, but D3 is just a collection of useful functions for us. And I love that picture from Emilia Wattenberger, who's also a very famous data visualization designer, a really nice person as well. And she does this with visualizations of GitHub repositories. And here, every larger dot is like one section of D3, one project, you can say, and every small circle is one function within these sections. And you can immediately see that there are a lot of functions about geo-projection. D3 is really strong in all these different map projections that you can have. But there are also a lot of functions like scales. We will see some of them in action, like in a few minutes. And usually we just take the functions that we need for a certain visualization, take them out from the whole D3 repository and just use these functions. But there are also things that we do not use at all anymore from D3, like all the selections. So if you're familiar with D3, you know that you can select certain HTML nodes with these selection functions. And this is something we do not do anymore, because for that, we really use Svelte, which is for us the front-end master. So with Svelte, we organize the whole architecture of an application, of a data visualization, basically also everything of the interactivity, so that you have maybe buttons or sliders or whatever, or hover tooltips, what else, everything which has to do with the front-end reactivity. Then we use Svelte and not D3 anymore. And again, D3, we just use it to do very special data visualization related things. I'll be more concrete in a second, but I just want to drop this slide in between, which is from the Svelte homepage, svelte.dev, where you can see how a Svelte application could look like. And we will look into real code later in the second part of my talk. But here you can already get an impression. So this is just an application with a button saying click 0 times. On the left-hand side, you can see how it is implemented. And you can see in lines 9 to 11 that there is really HTML code. So that's the big difference to D3. You can write HTML directly. And in the HTML, you can use JavaScript variables like this count variable that is defined in a JavaScript block on top. But more of that just in a few minutes. And what we and many others have realized a while ago is that Svelte and D3 are like two puzzle pieces that fit very well together. So there are things where Svelte is really good in, and there are things where D3 is better in. And if you combine the two, it's a perfect couple for data visualization. And of course, that's not just by coincidence. The creator of Svelte, who is Rich Harris, he worked at the New York Times as a graphics editor when he developed Svelte, and also D3, who was developed by Mike Bostock, like I think it's now 11 years ago. Mike Bostock, he also worked at the New York Times, and they both developed their tools to do better data visualizations. And so the combination of both is really not by coincidence, but it's really by purpose. But what does that mean if I'm a little bit more concrete? How do we combine Svelte and D3 then in the optimal way? So we use Svelte for everything front-end, which means every time we want to do DOM manipulations, for example, Svelte is the right choice. But also if you want to do transitions, if, for example, a DOM element needs to move from one side to the other side of the web page, then Svelte has batteries inbuilt to enable these transitions. And yeah, in general, everything with user interface, when we, for example, also design our elements of the visualization, like a line and a line chart or a simple button, then this is purely done with Svelte. On the other hand, D3 is always good for the math and the paths. That's always what I say to my colleagues when they are wondering, okay, how do we now combine this to that? And D3 is really when it comes to the inner circles of the data visualization itself. So if you need to do some mathematics, like you have I don't know, coordinates on a map, and you want to project these coordinates to pixels, then D3 has the right function for sure. But also paths. So a lot in data visualization on the web runs as SVGs, as you know. And the path element in SVG is really powerful because you can draw basically everything with the path element. And it's usually a little bit cumbersome to come up with the right codes to direct the path to its right shape. And for that, D3 has a lot of like generators where you can generate a line, where you can generate dots, areas, and what else. And then D3 has also quite powerful collection of transformation functions. What I mean by that is, for example, date transformations. So when you have like a date display in your application and you want to show the right date format for your user anywhere in the world, then D3 also has the right functions to do something like that. Or like integer transformations. So I mean, when you always want to have 2 decimal digits, then D3 has the right function to do that as well. And then we can see that usually in the end, the data visualization consists of a lot of Svelte and a little bit of D3. And the big difference between two is the coding style again. That means D3 has this imperative coding style, do this, do this, do this, dear browser. Whereas Svelte has this more declarative style, which means you can really write HTML and you can use CSS to style your elements, which is really cool when you work in a larger team and you need to share code. Then it's much, much easier to share declarative code because it's so easy to understand and to read, because you can literally see the web page when you read the code. Yeah, and now I want to show you a few projects that we did over the course of the last year, I would say, which are just, more or less randomly selected, but they all are built with Svelte in combination with a little bit of D3. And I want to start with that one. That's the classical Sonntagsfrage, which means this is the polling situation for all the different parties in Germany and how they behaved over time. And this is something we regularly have on our webpage or in dedicated articles. And we thought it might be quite cool to link like the polls to the possible government coalitions. And this is, of course, something which can be easily done with Svelte. So building the whole front end Svelte, and then for like the lines and the curve shapes and all that, you can use D3 functions. There are also much simpler stuff that we build with D3 and Svelte. And this is like when it comes to chart types that are non-standard. So like this one here is a spiral. Every round is 1 day, and it is showing when air raid sirens were activated in different cities in Ukraine. And it's usually quite hard to find a no-code tool to build these spirals, maybe Tableau, but Tableau is for us difficult to integrate with the CMS. So this is, of course, again, a typical use case for a Svelte D3 combination, where you then can just build the right paths and the right shapes with D3, and then you put everything together, like also the city selection here on the top with Svelte. and then it just works. And of course, this is fully responsive, so it really adjusts to the screen width and height. And then we also do a lot of scrolly tellings. Also for that application, Svelte is really cool. There are ready-to-use scrolly components that you can just use, and then you have a scrollable animation or a scrollable data visualization on your web page. This one here was a visualization of corona-related deaths in Germany, where you scroll through time, and every black dot here on the map is one person dying in the specific county where he or she was living. And on top, we had some additional information about the coronavirus pandemic. And this one is also a nice example. This is not using D3 very excessively. I think we only used it like for the curve at the bottom. But Svelte is in the end just JavaScript, and so that means you can not only integrate with D3 very easily, but you can also integrate with any other JavaScript library. And here we used the REPL WebGL library to plot these 100,000 dots directly in the browser, and to make it also fully responsive. That was quite cool. I mean, otherwise you could also make it as a video that is scrollable also, but we wanted to have it high quality at every screen width and height, and fully customizable. And so we plot these dots with WebGL using the REPL library, which is very easy to just combine with Svelte, because yeah, both are just JavaScript. And that one was a visualization like about Nobel Prize winners, which is also a scrolly telling where we analyzed all the Nobel Prize winners over time, and where you grouped them by different categories, used different chart types like this histogram here to show how old were the Nobel laureates when they got their prize. And again, this is something we really sketched on paper, and with Svelte and D3, you can really implement it as it was painted on paper, sketched on paper, which is quite cool when you work together with a designer, for example, who has maybe no idea how it is implemented later on, and you can say, okay, no problem, with D3 and Svelte, we will build it. Yeah, and last but not least, this example here that you've already seen in the beginning. This was during the Olympics in February this year, where we wanted to visualize speed skating and also some other disciplines. And yeah, then we had the data, how fast the speed skaters go around, and we wanted to animate that. And of course, you can do really funny things. So here it's just a normal race. And when you know speed skating, usually it's just pair runs. So you have one speed skater against another, but you never have the whole field at once. But with the animation, of course, you can do it all at once, or you can do things like taking Claudia Pechstein's runs from like the last 6-7 Olympic Games and then run Pechstein versus Pechstein. We also did that in an article, which was quite funny. And again, yeah, this was just an idea that we scribbled on paper, and which was then easily implemented with Svelte and D3. And my idea now is to show you a little bit the guts behind the front ends. And of course, it's not that easy to dive into an existing code base, and that's why I thought I show you some extracted examples for some categories, like the easy transitions that are enabled with Svelte. And in the end, we will shortly look at the code base of this speed skating visualization, which is also open source. And I share the link with you afterwards, so that you can, after the meetup, go into another deep dive into the real code base for this animation that we used on spiegel.de. And yeah, the first thing I want to talk about are transitions in Svelte. And for that, just switch to my browser. And on the Svelte website, svelte.dev, you have these REPL surface where you can write Svelte code, and you immediately get the result here on the right-hand side. And I already prepared here a very simple data visualization, which is the classic scatter plot. And this scatter plot here in that example can be used to show 4 different data sets, A, B, C, and D. And when I select those, these data sets just get plotted. And just showing you the data, which is defined here in this JavaScript file. So here you can see dataset A, and it consists of an array of objects where there is an X and a Y property. You can see that really resembles to the axis here and ranges. And then there's B, C, and of course also dataset D. And when I go to the app.svelte, that's always the root component of an Svelte application. And then we can roughly see how a Svelte application is working. And usually all these Svelte components, also the app.svelte component, consists of 3 different parts. There's usually here a script part where we can write all the JavaScript. Then there is an HTML part where we can just write HTML. And here you can already see, okay, there's like a wrapper div, and then there's something, a chart and a selector. Okay, that's the chart here on top and the selector at the bottom. Makes sense. But that does not look like real HTML. And then there's also, as a third part, the style, which is the CSS that you then can write. And this is, I guess, what every front developer, of course, knows. Here's the class wrapper, and then you can apply some CSS to it. That's it. So no magic here, but maybe a little bit more magic here in the HTML part, because you can not only see that I use these weird components here, but I use also like JavaScript variables within HTML, because like this X range, Y range, selected data stuff, that is all defined here in the JavaScript part, but can easily be used in the HTML. And that's part of the reactivity concept of Svelte. And those of you who might know React and Vue, this is something I guess you know. So you also have like the components that you can use in the JSX maybe, or in a Vue template. And then you can also apply properties to these components. That's exactly the same here. But in Svelte, it's a little bit easier. You write it not in JSX or something. You really write HTML code. And these chart and selector components, they are really just imported from other Svelte files that we'll have a look at in a few seconds. But just to show you here in that root component, the root component deals with the different data sets. So we have here the selector, and it binds here the selected property, which means that the selected option, which is a JavaScript variable that is initialized with A, always reflects the selected data set here. So when I click on B, then also the selected option will switch to B, and when I click on C, the selected option switches to C. Then let's just have a quick look what happens with this selected option, and that's what we have here in line 11. And there you can see, okay, we are taking the data that I just showed to you, where we have like these 4 different arrays, A, B, C, and D. And then we are just selecting the selected option. So we select A, B, C, or D. And the result is stored in selected data. That makes sense. But there is something weird here, and this is the $sign. And this is something which we call labels in JavaScript. This is valid JavaScript, so it's allowed to do that. And I think it's a historic relic. Nobody uses that anymore. But yeah, Rich Harris and the Svelte community said, well, let's just use that to make something reactive. So then the Svelte compiler, which transformed this whole app.svelte into JavaScript code, says, okay, when I have this $sign here, that means for me when anything is changing here in that line, then I rerun this line of JavaScript code. And that means when the selected option changes, like when the user is clicking here on B, then this line of JavaScript is rerun again. So selected data will always have the currently selected data set. And the selected data is exactly the data that we feed then into the chart. So the chart just gets the newly selected data and just plots, then seems that it just plots the dots here on our screen. And then there's here some more lines of code. That's a lot of lines of code for a little effect. This is just for determining the range of x values and the range of y values. This is just that our chart knows how far it should draw the x and y axis. And here is the first example where we spice our Svelte application a little bit with a D3 function. So here you can see we import the max function from D3 just to determine what the maximum x and y values are, so that we can store in the array like the x range from 0 to, I don't know, 18 or 19 maybe, and the y range accordingly from 0 to 12. And that's exactly the three properties now that we have that we feed into our chart, because the chart only just need to know what's my ranges on the x and y axis. So how should I plot the axis, and what's the data? And that's everything. And I guess it's most interesting now to go into the chart.svelte, where this chart component is defined. And this is looking exactly the same from the structure again as the app.svelte. So we have the JavaScript part, it's a little bit longer, it ends here. Then we have an HTML part. And here again, we can see, okay, this is something we know. There is an SVG, which is defined, and then there is an x-axis component, a y-axis component. Okay, fine. And then there's this one here, which is also not valid HTML, of course, but valid in the Svelte file, where we do a loop over our data, extract the x and y values, which are the pixel values. And then we have here this data point component, which is basically drawn for every data point, which are the black circles here. And every time, of course, the data changes, this is running again and again. So every time I switch here from one data set to the other, we get new data points plotted and the old ones are erased. And then there can, of course, be some styles. So maybe we can like style these dots directly in the CSS here. In that case, our dots are just components, so we cannot directly style them here, but we can like style the SVG or whatever. Yeah, and now just to be complete here, where this rendered data is coming from, let's just have a look what happens to the data when we feed it in. So first of all, here in that section with these exports, which is also, of course, valid JavaScript, which comes from the module exports, we define the properties of a component. So that means, okay, here's the chart component, and it has a property data, a property X range, and a property Y range, and I can use them to feed in this data from outside, as we've just seen. And then there is, again, a little bit of D3 functionality coming. So we use the scale linear function from D3, and that's a function that the D3 users of you all know, I guess, because these scale functions are necessary to transform your data values into pixel values. So because like that data point here has a y value of 4 point something and an x value of 4, but of course you do need the x and y pixels to really plot it at the right point here. And that's what these scale linear functions do. Here you can define a domain, which means like the range of your data. We got that was the X range from outside. And then we define a range in the pixel space, which is basically going from 0 to width maybe, or you can subtract some padding so that it does not clue to the outer borders of your web page, for example. And the same is happening for the Y values. And then we rewrite the data. We create a new variable rendered data, and we use the data that we feed from outside, so the current selected data set. And then we remap the values. So we use now our freshly defined X scale and Y scale functions, feed in the X and Y properties, and then get the transformed X and Y values. And everything is running here with the $sign. Why that? Because of course, when the data changes, we want to rerun that, and that's what's happening. So when data or X range or Y range is changing, then these lines will rerun again, just automatically. That's the Svelte magic, which is so cool in your developer experience. And here also, when the data changes, then we reproject it to the new pixel values. But that's not everything. we also have here these width and height variables in, because what I've not shown so far is that this plot is fully responsive. And that's another Svelte sugar syntax thing, because we have here in this outer div, which is styled that it always fills the whole available space. We bind these client width and client height properties to JavaScript variables. And this client width and client height, those are properties that are native to the HTML element. So every div element, for example, has a client width and a client height, which stores the width and height of the div element in pixels. And with this bind directive, we can couple this property to a width and a height JavaScript variable that we defined here on top. And this width and height, they are always up to date. So when I change like here the width, then this width variable is always rewritten with the current value. And of course, I can use that then when I do my X scale, where I use the width as well. So my X scale is updated every time when the width is changing. And yeah, this is a pattern that you very often have in data visualization, because you want to build responsive plots. And sometimes it's possible without any JavaScript, but in many cases it's not possible without JavaScript. And then this trick is really nice. All right, and then there's something missing. I would say I skipped the axis for now. This is just some SVG lines and text that is plotted here. But I share the link to that REPL afterwards, so you can have a look at it. But I want to go into the data point component here. And the data point component, where is it here? Looks like that. So it's also possible to have only HTML or SVG and JavaScript, but also no CSS. That's allowed. And here we can again see, okay, there is an X and Y property defined, which is just the position, of course, of every data point. And then you can see here, I just define a new SVG group that I translate to the X and Y positions. And at that place, I then draw a circle with a certain radius, and that's basically it. The cool thing now is I can do things like, I don't know, like fill purple or something like that. And then it's just applied. Maybe purple is not that visible, red's better. And then it's just applied, of course, to every data point, because we are looping over these data points and we are getting like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think it's 11 or 10 data points. So we get 11 times this component on our chart. And now the cool thing also is that we can now use a little bit more Svelte magic to just play around now a little bit, because when I switch from one data set to the other, we realize, okay, it's always the same amount of dots, and maybe it would be cool if the transition is animated in between. And this is something where you need a lot of lines of code compared to what we are doing now in D3 only. So it's possible. Sometimes you can achieve a good result with CSS, but that might also be a little bit cumbersome depending on how your visualization is looking and how complex it is. In all of the cases, it's really easy to work with some cool Svelte functions. And I already started here importing these two functions here, the tweened function from Svelte Motion and the cubic out function from Svelte Easing. And the tweened function is really a function that can now tween values from one state to another state. For example, it could tween our X and Y values from one state to another state. I'm just showing you how that's working. I'm starting that with defining some parameters. So let's just do an object where we say when we have an animation, we want it for a duration of, I don't know, let's say 500 milliseconds. And when these dots should move around, they shouldn't do it linearly, but they should do it with this cubic out easing function. So we could just say, okay, there should be an easing, which is basically cubic out, so the function that we import from Svelte as well. And now what we can do is we can define new variables for x and y, and I call them like tx for tweened x. So this is like, should be my tweened x value later on. And I then call the tweened function, and we can give it an initial value. So if there is nothing, then it should be just null, so it shouldn't be shown at all. And then we hand over our parameters, so that tween function knows now, okay, I should ease the transition with the cubic out function, and the total duration of these transitions should be 500 milliseconds. We basically do the same with for the y values, which I then call tweened y, which gets the same parameters. And now I can do the following, just writing it down once and then explaining it. So I can take tx. Tx has a set method. I can do this, and that means I'm now taking my tweened x, which is not just a an atomic variable, but which is something more, which, for example, has a set method. And I can say, okay, set our tweened x to x, so our x value that is coming from outside. And every time x is changing, then rerun this. You remember, that's what the $ is doing here. Every time x is changing, so when I change the data set, then I also want to reset my tweened x. And I do the same now for y. And now nothing changes, of course, because in the HTML or SVG part, we didn't change anything. What we do now is I exchange here now these x and y values by tx. And when I want to have the current value of our tweened x, then I need to write it with a $ here. That's like a shorthand. And I do the same here. Let's first look at the effect. So when I now switch between these different data sets, they are really animated. And I can even like change the parameter here to 1 second of transition duration. Then it's maybe a little bit more visible. Then you can also see like the cubic easing, if YouTube is good enough for that. And that's like a Svelte concept, which we call a Svelte store. So this tx and ty, they are technically called stores, and they can have different methods. And the specialty about these tween stores is that they are able to make a transition from an old to a new value. So every time we have to set again, then the transition is running, and I'm directly calling the value which is inside these stores with this $. That's how we get that here. And yeah, there is of course many more Svelte magic stuff that I could show you now, but like the transitions is one part of the story why I really love Svelte, especially for data visualization, where you usually have a lot of these transitions that need to be smooth and easy. And all the or the modularization with the components is another one. And let's just have a look at the code of the speed skater. For example, there I'm just showing you here a little bit the files now. You can really see, if I go here in the animation directly, you can see, okay, there is a Svelte component which defines just one of these athletes. And you remember, like here, if I restart that once again, these little blue and red dots that are moving here, this is the speed skating athletes. And each of them is just defined within one of these, within this athlete Svelte component. And then I can use it. And depending on the data, of course, I can reuse it as many times as I want. Then there's like a Svelte component which defines the background, the speed skating arena in that case. Then there's a Svelte component which is invisible, which is the track, so which is like the path that these athletes are going around. And yeah, it would take now the whole evening if I would run through through that code repo here. But again, I will share the link to it in just a second. Just want to sum up that a little bit. There is also something which is called sync layers. Maybe we can talk in the discussion a little bit about that. And of course, I mentioned the modularization. which is just a different component. And of course, the modularization is for us at derspiegel really, really interesting, because we have a couple of developers and we have a lot of projects. And of course, we want to reuse stuff that is reusable. For example, this control bar here at the bottom of the animation, that can be used in any other application as well. And this is just a Svelte component with subcomponents in the end that we can just copy into the next project and just reuse it. And yeah, coming to the end, in the beginning I said we have these 3 basic requirements for every Svelte D3 application that we publish on our website: speed, accuracy, originality. And it's really interesting, but Svelte in combination with D3 enables all of these basically. So we can easily use the inbuilt functions of Svelte, like the transition stuff, but it's also very easy to import other JavaScript libraries like D3, or when you work a lot with map data, it's really easy to import turf or topper.json libraries or whatever, because it just works like JavaScript works. Then the reusability and the modularization really enables that we can have component libraries or store libraries. So I haven't talked about stores now in detail. I only touched it a little bit, but stores are also reactive variables in general that you can reuse all over the project. And of course, the setup of Svelte applications is just made to build these libraries. So we have some GitHub repos where we just store like a button component, a navigation component, and then when we need it in our data visualization, we just grab it from there. And so we are quite fast when developing applications. Also, originality is given because these buttons and navigation menus and whatever, they have the Spiegel style already incorporated. And when you reuse tested components, then usually also accuracy is given. And yeah, also when it gets really difficult, like when you have WebGL or when you draw on canvas, on 2D canvas in general, then there are concept abstractions in Svelte. And if you are interested in that, I recommend you just Google Svelte Summit in spring. There I gave a talk about something which is renderless components. With that, you are able to draw on the canvas with components, so as it was SVG, and that's quite convenient because, yeah, if you know the Canvas API, can be a little bit cumbersome to work with it. And last but not least, all this modularization enables hierarchical data structures or the hierarchical data concept. That means, as we've seen here, we had a data set which consisted of 4 sub-data sets. But the chart component in the end only got the one data set which was selected, because the chart component does not necessarily need to know what other data sets there are at the same time. And this was a simple example, but in more complex examples, that's quite important, that you have this like hierarchical data concept, that you only hand over data that is really needed by the component. And of course, a lot of them, these criteria are also fulfilled with frameworks like React or Vue, but there are these little extras like the stores, like the tweens, like the transitions, like the easy integration of other libraries that really then make the difference why we use Svelte for dataviz and nothing else. And here are the relevant links. I guess we can share the presentation afterwards, definitely via the meetup page, I guess. And then, yeah, you do not need to copy like these numbers here. Those 2 at the bottom, these are REPLs. One of them I showed, another one is also a little bit similar. Just check that out. And here, github.com/spiegelgraphics is our larger GitHub page where we share all the projects that we could open source already. So it's just 2 at the moment. One is the speed skating one, but it will be more in the very near future. And with that, I think I talked for quite a bit of time, 45 minutes or so. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for listening.
Now I imagine some big round of applause from the YouTube audience. Unfortunately, they are not able to clap their hands, or at least we cannot see it. Thanks from my side. Awesome session. Really cool, really interesting. I have some questions from my side, but let me just see in the chat what's happening here. Maybe start with like the question we posted in the chat, who of the audience used Svelte so far? And Konstantinos sees it as an absolute joy and game changer. Yeah, not only with D3 in general, he also loves Svelte Kit. I can totally relate to this, and yeah, not related to your talk in specific, but yeah, he's missing native WebSockets, but this will be included after version 1. I've also read this, so if you're missing this feature, stay tuned. I think the Svelte community is really active, pushing towards release 1 of Svelte Kit. Yeah, that's really awesome. Okay, I have a question from my side. I mean, could you elaborate a bit how were visualizations done at Spiegel before? Like you kind of, as I assume you introduced it a bit, or you would drive it there, doing it with Svelte. Which other technologies were used before, and was this more like considered a bit painful? I have the feeling that like with Svelte, it's super easy because Svelte takes away so much boilerplate. And can you compare it with?
Yeah, so when I joined Der Spiegel, they already used Svelte, but it was kind of the reason why I joined Der Spiegel to strengthen like Svelte at the news magazine. I know what they did before, so they wrote vanilla JavaScript and used jQuery and D3 of course as well. And of course, it is, as you said, that it takes away a lot of boilerplate, that it has the reactivity concept inbuilt. I think that's the main point, where Svelte is, from the developer experience, much better than using jQuery or vanilla JS. And of course, you're faster in the end. And what I can compare is that nowadays we do a lot more interactive data visualization than we did like 2 years back when I still was not joining the team. But that's what they said to me, that they had a lot more products that can be published because of Svelte. That's like the main difference, maybe.
And how much of your work is the Svelte part or the coding part? I also here would assume that like 80% is not doing Svelte, but it's just like finishing up with like the paperwork, the concepts, the general idea you want to transport, right? So Svelte is maybe not a big thing. Also integrating it with maybe the CMS or the other systems, it's seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah. So I mean, to be clear, as I am leading the whole graphics team, I also am responsible for static graphics that are not done by Svelte at all. So yeah, the 20% is a good guess, I would say, for me personally. But in the team, we have in total 4 developers, plus now also some freelancers from time to time that are involved with Svelte like 100% of the time. So they really use it a whole day and develop everything with Svelte. So maybe I'm the wrong benchmark for the team, but if we take the developers, they are really into it and doing like the whole day Svelte stuff, which is quite cool.
Can imagine. And even though you abstracted away quite a bit in your demos, I think for like more complex visualizations, like the whole architecture or the concept behind Svelte is really playing a big role here to make it easy. This was how I came to Svelte. I kind of skipped React in my career, but I came from Angular, and a bit with so to say, from Angular to Svelte, that's like a 180-degree thing, and this ease of use of Svelte, like you have like this reactivity things with these JavaScript labels, the stores. This immediately feels like, also for, I would say, for JavaScript newbies, really, you can get started really fast with stuff, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I always got asked if you still should learn D3, for example, for data visualization, and I always recommend to learn D3, but from the beginning in combination with Svelte, or maybe Vue is also okay, but to have like this combination that everything which is front-end DOM manipulation stuff, that should be done like by one of the frameworks, and Svelte is currently, at least for our applications, the best. And only use the D3 functions where D3 really shines, and not like all the selects. And you also do not need like this whole enter, exit, update pattern from D3, because that's just done by Svelte automatically.
I found this also interesting in your talk to which parts you do in Svelte, and which parts do you take from D3, like the more complex things, and where Svelte is not like positioned in that way that much. It's then you use D3, and it plays nice.
Yeah.
Did you ever come to like a kind of boundary in some requirement or with some visualization where you or your team like kind of struggled, or where it just didn't work out so easily with Svelte, or where you?
No, I can't remember. So I remember some projects where we thought, oh my God, how will that end? But it all worked out in the end. So the good thing is, I mean, the JavaScript community is so great, and you have so many different NPM packages. And again, for every problem, you have an NPM package or some JavaScript snippets or whatever. And I mean, you can just use them within Svelte, and that's why usually you can solve any challenge that you might have. So the boundaries are then more on like what can a browser display and what not, but it's not on the side of Svelte.
Giorgio Boa wrote also Svelte is awesome. We had him with a talk about Amplify, AWS Amplify, and how to start a small Svelte app really fast and deploy it. This was also interesting. So I'm not surprised that he is also like a Svelte fan boy. Cool. Let me see. Okay. I'm not sure if we have time, and you have like now the time also to talk about this. But yeah, maybe in a short sentence or so. Is there anything like to integrate? I would say, let's say different. I assume a lot of things. Sorry, that you like for each visualization you kind of create a package, right? And deploy like a static site, and this is then like, I would think like of an iframe or whatever, or to include it in different ways in the CMS. Is this like, how is this embedded in the CMS at Spiegel?
Yeah, usually we build a single file application, or single file in the sense of just an HTML where everything is included, JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. And of course, this can be integrated just via an iframe. So that was for a long time the standard way, but it has limitations, of course. One is that Google does not really like iframe embeds, because they are loading a little bit later than the page, and then the whole page is moving around. And maybe you know that from some websites, you read something and then the element above is loading and everything is going down, and you don't know where you should continue to read. That's one problem. Another problem is that, for example, when you want to do a scrolly telling, then an iframe would not work just by nature. because it can't be sticky like within an iframe. And for that, we directly embed the Svelte applications into the CMS. And it's really easy. It's just the whole code of the Svelte application is just put into the web page. So this is built on the server, and then you just get it like a static page then on the front end. And then you can use Svelte hydrate functions, for example, to feed in the data and then to make it live. That's basically how it's going. So sometimes it's still iframe. In most of the cases, it's natively embedded.
Yeah. Maybe you can tell a bit for those who don't know what SvelteKit is. Did you ever do something with SvelteKit? Maybe in a side project or so? Or are you only doing it with Svelte?
Yeah. So at the news magazine, we usually only use Svelte. Well, only when we use Svelte. The reason is because SvelteKit is really when you want to build standalone web pages. So when you want to build a whole web page where you also need routing, for example, then SvelteKit is the right choice. And you can also easily deploy SvelteKit applications to services like to serverless services like also Netlify and Amazon. So Kit is always when, especially like when you need routing, when you have a standalone web page, and so on. And Svelte is basically the core. So with Svelte, you can also build web pages, but routing is not included, like as it is in other frameworks. But you can also build little widgets that run within another website, which is just Svelte, and that's basically what we do all the time. So we embed widgets into the website, which are then the data visualizations. And for that, Svelte is totally fine. So we do not need the extra power of SvelteKit here. But I've used SvelteKit for private projects, and it is... so I would recommend to learn Svelte first so that you know the reactivity concepts and stuff. And if you're a little bit familiar with that, you can have a look at SvelteKit and see how the routing works, how maybe also integration of external data sources works. So SvelteKit has some really nice tricks there as well. And yeah.
No. I don't see any other comments in the chat. Maybe we give the audience a few minutes. If there are additional questions, just post them in the chat. And yeah, you will share the slides later. We will also post it below the YouTube video afterwards. And
cool.
I see some more Svelte talks coming also within our community because yeah, Svelte in general is really in a big hype currently for reasons. And it fills a nice niche, in my opinion, between like the big established frameworks. It's also not like a competitor, so to say, to the others or against like the other frameworks. There are reasons to do stuff with React or Angular or Vue. But from my experience, especially for small applications that need to really perform fast and where you don't want to fuss around with much boilerplate, Svelte is really awesome, and you can scale it up pretty well. So like you are the best example, or Spiegel. That there's no limit because the strong focus on performance and the intersection or the good connection between data visualization and doing this with Svelte. This is really like, yeah, I think that this was like the main driver for Rich Harris to come up with something like Svelte, because he basically did the same like you were doing at Spiegel. He had maybe some pain with doing visualizations completely by himself, or even with D3, like the learning curve, I think is really high.
Yeah.
And that's all baked
exactly.
in Svelte.
Yeah, especially now in the news business, a lot of magazines, newspapers, newsrooms are using Svelte now. I mean, the New York Times, of course, where it comes from. But also here, like in Germany, I know many other newspapers using Svelte as their main power horse to do dataviz.
No, cool. Okay, I don't see any other questions, but if you have some, just post them in the chat or just post them to us on Twitter. If you have some questions for Matthias, you can reach him. Let me just find your Twitter profile again. Okay, here we go. Okay, I think that's it for now. Thanks again for your time. It was awesome. I'm thinking to invite you in 1 year and telling us what other awesome stuff you developed then and how Svelte goes so far with that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks. And yeah, with that, have a nice evening. And for the YouTube audience, stay tuned. Follow us on Twitter. Take a look at our meetup page. There will be some more events around interesting front-end stuff. And we also plan to meet in real somewhere in Frankfurt, Wiesbaden, or Mainz, maybe in late summer. Let's see. Stay tuned. Thanks again, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.